Hey, it's Danny the Plumber, and in this video I'll teach you how to properly diagnose a running toilet. There are a few different things that cause a toilet to run, and after being a plumber for 14 years, I'll tell you this is like one of the largest things that I go out for, the most common thing that I go and fix. As you can see, I've taken a toilet and I've cut the front side out of it so you guys can see real nicely what I'm doing. So I'll lift the toilet lid. And you can see the inside pretty clearly here. So when I go out to a job that has a toilet leaking, the first thing that I suspect is probably the toilet flapper. This is the toilet flapper here. They come in different sizes and shapes and styles. This is a Kohler flapper. This is kind of a traditional universal flapper. This one does not have the float that Kohler has, and I strongly recommend that whatever flapper you pull out of the toilet, you should put that one back in. Match it up at the hardware store. So this is a different style. It's almost the same, just doesn't have the float on it. So this one is the tank fill valve, and this will also cause a phantom flush sometimes, and it will also cause the toilet to run. Before I show you how to fix the problem, I want to quickly go over how a toilet works. So the water comes in through the main water pipe at your flex connector, which is screwed onto the tank fill valve right here. So the water comes up and fills this whole tank. So this is the tank right here. Below is the bowl, which you sit on. So when the water fills up and you need to flush your waste down, you flush down, you pull down the handle, and the flapper comes up like this. And all this water in here goes through right here, the flush valve, into the bowl, which flushes away all the waste in the toilet. So the number one problem when a toilet is running or leaking or flushing by itself is this flapper. Luckily, that's really easy to fix. The next major problem that I see with toilets is with the fill valve. If your toilet is just continuously running and running and running, you may need a new fill valve. And one way to test that is to simply lift up on the float right here. And if you lift up and the water doesn't immediately stop, then you know this unit is probably bad and you'll probably have to change it. So the way this works is the water shuts off the fill valve by filling up the tank. And so if you can imagine, the water just fills, comes up, comes up, comes up, comes up, and as soon as it hits this level here, it tells the water to stop flowing into the tank. The water comes up, it stops. And the third biggest problem that I see with running toilets is to do with a fill valve, which is this thing here. The gasket below, if you can just peek in right there, that gasket goes bad and water will leak from the tank to the bowl. And the gasket here and the tank to bowl bolts you would do at the same time. And I'll get more into that later. So these are the tank to bowl bolts for a two-piece toilet only. A one-piece toilet doesn't have this at all. So these bolts here have usually little washers and rubber gaskets that prevent the water from leaking through. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So once again, there are three components that usually I see that will cause a toilet to leak. Number one, a bad flapper. That's the most important, most obvious, and most reoccurring problem that I see is a bad flapper. Next is a bad fill valve, which is this thing here. And finally, the flush valve, gasket, and tank to bowl bolts. All right, so I'm going to show you how to change a flapper. Really simple. And once again, you're going to do this when you notice the toilet flushes sometimes by itself every hour, every 15 minutes. Or if you notice a little water running into the bowl after you flushed it and it's just continuing to run in there. Or you hear your fill valve occasionally filling, and that just is a noise of just a little bit of water spraying into the tank and bowl. So to do that, it's super simple. You, number one, want to match whatever flapper you have in there to the old one to the new one. And simply what I like to do first is undo the chain from the flush handle. Once that's free, there are two little ears on the flapper, and that just looks like this right here. And so those ears you're going to have to remove. And a lot of times this flapper gets really stiff through the ears and it's a little hard to remove. So you want to make sure you don't break this tube, which is the fill valve. But this one's a newer one. It's really easy to come off and on. So you remove that, discard your old flapper, or take it into the hardware store to match it if you're uncertain. You want to make sure that this area right here, this is the seal where it seals, the flapper seals. You want to make sure that's free of any debris or large scratches. I don't recommend cleaning it too much. You don't want to scratch it at all. You can just wipe it with a rag or something, make sure there's nothing on there. Next, you'll grab your new flapper. This one I know doesn't match exactly. You will want to match it. I'm just using this as an example. I like to get the ears on first, both sides. Once that's done, you'll have to cut the chain 98% of the time, I would say. This one is too long. You can see if I were to just put this chain right on here, there's too much linkage in that chain. And then what that does is when I go to flush the toilet, the flapper doesn't come up high enough, and that doesn't allow the water to properly flush the toilet down. So you can see there's just too much linkage. So what we're going to do is simply cut the linkage out. And what I like to do is they give this little clip which is on top of the flapper. Go ahead and put that on your flush handle. Take the linkage, and you want to give a little bit of play in there. You don't want it too tight, but you don't want it super loose like it was. So you just want to give a little bit extra, a couple of these links extra. I'd say one or two extra. And so when you see that it's just kind of hanging there nicely, you're going to take that measurement and you're going to cut it right there. You can discard the rest of the chain there or save it in case you made a mistake. You can add some linkage later. And simply connect the chain to the little clip that they provide on the flapper. Now put the clip back on the flapper, and that's a perfect amount. You see how it opens totally, the flapper opens totally full, allowing the water to go down. That's a nice installation there. The next major problem with a running toilet is the tank fill valve. If you've lifted this and the water does not stop running, this thing needs probably to be changed. Or if you are getting no water coming out of here at all, there's another reason you would want to change the tank fill valve. This is another really simple job, and I'll show you exactly how to do it right now. So from underneath your toilet, you'll have to probably lay on the ground or kneel on the ground to get access to the bottom of it, where you're going to find one nut on the tank fill valve. Grab yourselves some channel locks, unscrew the nut, turning it counterclockwise. There's the nut. Once the nut is off, you're going to remove the clip here, and it's just going to be free. Really simple, one nut connection. One thing I forgot to mention, of course, underneath, before you unscrew the nut, you're going to have to remove your flex connector, which is the water supply hose. And just simply turn off the angle stop and unscrew that counterclockwise as well. So, once this is out of here, you can grab a new one. I recommend Fluid Master. They're like the best in the business. I've got a Pro 45 series here. So let's take this out of the box and see what we've got in here. All right, so here's our new tank fill valve, and I like to match the same height that I had our old one at, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. So it's important to match your height of the tank fill valve, and that is done by a simple adjustment. So I like to read the adjustment. This is the old tank fill valve, and I can see a little number 10 right there. The new one has been preset at the same height, so I'm lucky I don't have to mess with that in this occasion. But if you do have to play with that, it's real simple. You'll slide this lock nut up, and so what you're going to want to do is get the right height by adjusting this height right here by sliding this little nut right here up. And this is just locking it in place. So this, when you slide it down, it's locked in. You slide it up, you can now move this thing freely by spinning this, just like that. And so you can go way up over here on some toilets, but usually not, or really low down if it's a different toilet, and you just want to match the same height as the old one. So I'm going to match it by going to the number 10, just like the old one. We'll slide that nut, important to slide that nut all the way down, lock it back in place. Now we're ready to install it onto the toilet. So they give you this little setup here, and you'll take it all apart. So again, here are the items that they give you inside your fill valve box. So I want to take this rubber gasket, and I'm going to punch out this inside center right here by just ripping that out. You can nowadays discard this center thing. This and this work with the old rigid style water supply hoses that go into the bottom of this. But nowadays, everyone's using the flexible water supply hose. So you can probably get rid of that these two things right here. And remember, that came from the center of that. Do not discard this. This is your gasket that you'll slide on in this direction onto the fill valve. So once again, it's this little lip is going to be downward. That flat side is going to be touching this flat side right here. Push it all the way up, and you're ready to install the fill valve. So we're going to drop our fill valve with the gasket down into the hole, and I like to line it up beforehand. There is this little 1/4 inch hose that will go into the little sleeve right there. We'll push that in later. And so I just want to make sure that that is facing the flush valve right here. So we'll drop it in facing that way. So when you drop this in, you want to make sure you line up this little, this is a water outlet that will connect the 1/4 inch hose to. So that little outlet should be facing the flush valve right here. Without hitting anything else. You don't want to be hitting the handle or anything else that's going on in the toilet right there. So we'll drop it in facing our fill valve, our flush valve, and then from underneath, you'll take the provided nut that they give and simply thread it on, hand tight as far as you can go. And then maybe another 1/2 a turn, 1/4 of a turn past that with a wrench. And it should look like this. The last two things that are provided in the box is the 1/4 inch tubing and the clip for the tubing. Now the clip is simply put on to the flush valve like this. And the 1/4 inch tubing is plugged into the fill valve over here, like that. And you'll need some scissors or a utility knife, and you'll just make a nice straight cut and plug that one in. This one's nice because they keep this so high up here, and I'll explain in a second why I like that. So that's how you install the fill valve. There's one more minor adjustment that you can make here. When you turn the water back on, you're going to want to see where the water line is, and it's usually marked. You definitely don't want the water to go so high that it's overflowing into the flush valve right here, because that will make your toilet continue to run. So you definitely have to keep it below this a good amount. And they usually have it marked, like I said, right here. So you can adjust that. The adjustment for that is in this thing right here. When we moved up and down on the numbers, that's the major adjustment, the large adjustment. But they provide a secondary small adjustment on the top right here. And there's a plus and a minus right on the top. And if you turn it counterclockwise, you can see that this thread here is moving, pushing this float downward further. And what that does is that means this thing goes further, so it lessens the amount of water in the tank. Conversely, if you turn it clockwise, it goes the other direction all the way up. Now I'm sending this thing really high up here, and so the water is going to fill up more. If you can visualize the water coming up further, it's going to be there. So that's a minor adjustment, and you can play with that one. If you've got this thing too high, if you've got water coming over here, or if it's too low, you can use this thing as a minor adjustment. All right, the last thing I want to talk about, and probably the least common thing when your toilet is still leaking a little water, is replacing the flush valve, which is this thing right here. So to do that, you're going to need to remove the flapper and get access to, there's either going to be 2 or 3 bolts here. You're going to get a screwdriver, remove those bolts, and these are called tank to bolt bolts. And then you'll be able to remove this tank, the whole thing, from the toilet bowl. Once you've done that, now this is a special Kohler flange gasket type thing right here. It's just not a common one, but it's the same principles as all of them. Then you'll remove this one, and this one has got a thing for the flush valve and the bolts put together. And I'll show you in a second the other style, the more common style. So you'll unscrew the nut on the bottom here, and you'll replace the gasket. And here's another style of gasket that would slide on there when you replace the gasket. And here are some tank to bowl bolts and gaskets. So next, grab yourself a pair of channel locks or something to loosen that nut right there. Turn that counterclockwise until it's fully released. And you're unscrewing that from the flush valve itself. So the whole flush valve, where my left hand is on, is going to be able to be removed once that nut is removed. And this is once again a very special style. This is a Kohler style. Most of them don't have all these little gaskets and things like that. It just has the one style, and I'll show you in a second how that can be put on. Alright, so then you would just grab, for the new one, a new gasket, and you could slide it on to it like that. But I've got a whole new toilet flush valve kit, and if you go as far as replacing the gasket, you may just want to replace the whole flush valve itself. So let's take this flush valve apart and kind of look at it. You would take this bottom nut off of it, and then just slide with the gasket right there. The whole flush valve down into the hole here, and very simply follow it up by the nut. Tighten that down pretty snug, hand tight as far as possible, and then of course follow it up again with your channel locks. Alright, so once that's totally secure with your channel locks, it's time to get your tank and bowl together. So you need this final gasket, and there's sometimes grooves in that gasket, so make sure those things line up with the grooves on your nut from above there. So that thing just goes in simply like that. And then you would grab your tank to bowl gaskets and bolts and nuts, and you would slide those into the necessary holes. Sometimes there's 2, as I said before, and sometimes there's 3 different holes. It depends on your toilet. And so you would just simply slide one little gasket all the way down a bolt like that, and then that goes into the toilet. And then what I like to do is and this is just not what a lot of manufacturers recommend, but I like to double that gasket up on the other side. And this is a really great tip because it definitely gives you a longer time before in between leaks. So 2 gaskets, one on both sides of it, is a nice little plumber's tip. And then follow it up by a flat washer, and then whatever style of bolt that they give you for that end. So you would do that for all 3, and of course tighten those down pretty snug. But remember, you don't want to crack the porcelain, and a lot of times that's done by just a crescent wrench, turning that clockwise. But oftentimes the bolt itself spins, so it may be necessary for you to back it up, and that's done with a big Phillips head screw right there. You just screwdriver, you put your Phillips head screwdriver down there, back it up while tightening that. Then once that's done, all 3 of them or 2, depending on your toilet, you'll just very simply slide that in to your toilet bowl, and then follow that up by another flat washer and the nut. So your toilet's right there where my finger is, right in the middle, and that flat washer and the nut locks the toilet tank and the bowl together. And of course you'll do that to your other areas where the bolts will go as well. One more thing I want to talk about real quickly is toilet handles. So if this handle is ever broken and you need to take it off, there's a nut here that you would screw. But the vast majority of these nuts are reverse thread. So what does that mean? Instead of taking it off by turning it counterclockwise, you would take that nut off by turning it clockwise. And it seems like you're tightening it, but you're really loosening it by turning it clockwise. So it looks like I'm tightening it here, but this nut is actually going to come off by me turning it clockwise like that. And so that's called reverse threads. The vast majority of these handles have reverse threads for some reason. So to change that, you just take that nut off, grab your new handle, slide it in position, making sure that the handle is the same type of handle. Not all handles are made equal. You have to match up the correct handle. Tighten that nut, most likely by turning it counterclockwise. Get your new handle in. And of course, you'll have to put the flapper chain back on. And that is it. That is how you guys rebuild all parts of a toilet. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you soon.